everyone. Today we will be discussing about forest-based movements. The objectives for today's study will be to focus on the concepts of environmental movements. Then we will discuss about some of the major environmental movements that took place in India, and finally we'll look into some of the major movements that happened across the world. An environmental movement is a type of a social movement that involves an array of individuals, groups, or coalitions that perceives a common interest in environmental protection and acts to bring about changes in any kind of environmental policies and practices. Now, this emergence and development of any kind of social movement depends on the dynamic interaction of three major factors. These factors are: first, the social movements are shaped by a broader political constraint and opportunities which are unique to the national context in which they emerge. These constraints and opportunities always involve the institutional structure and have an informal power relationship between the national political system, and also includes several relative openness or closure to the institutionalized political structure. Second comes the organizational resources. It can be informal or formal and always must be available to mobilize the people into collective action and also sustain a social movement. The third important factor is a collective process of interpretation, attribution, and social construction which gives meaning and value to this collective action. Now, if we try to define environmental movements in terms of social movement, we can say that environmental movements are conceived as a broad network of people and organizations engaged in collective action in pursuit of environmental benefit. This definition was proposed in 1999 by Christopher Roots. An environmental movement is always inclusive of conception and is consistent with the usage of terms among environmental activists. There are various major environmental movements that took place in India. A large number of environmental movements have emerged in India, especially after 1970s. These movements have outgrown a series of independent responses from some local issues in different parts at different times. However, the emergence of these environmental movements were never restricted to any particular part of the country. As pointed out by some great environmentalists and historians, the environmental movements have emerged from Himalayan regions of Uttar Pradesh to the tropical forests of Kerala and Gujarat, ending up to Tripura. The following map is a map of India which shows different locations of activities of main environmental movements that took place across India. Let's get into some of the major environmental movements that took place in India. The first is the Bishnoi movement. This movement was led by Amrita Devi, in which around 363 people sacrificed their lives for the protection of their forests. This movement was a first of its kind to have developed the strategy of embracing or hugging trees for their protection. This movement took place around the 1700s in the Khejarli region of Marwar regions of the Rajasthan state. This movement was primarily led by Amrita Devi along with the Bishnoi villagers of this particular village and the surrounding areas in order to save their sacred trees from being cut down by the king's soldier to build a new palace. Amrita Devi, a female villager, could not bear to witness the destruction of both her faith and the village's sacred tree. She hugged the trees and encouraged others to do so. 363 Bishnoi villagers were killed in this movement. The king, who came to know about these events, finally rushed to the village, apologized and ordered the soldiers to cease these kind of logging operations. Soon afterwards, the Maharaja designated the Bishnoi state as a protected area, forbidding any harm to their trees and animals. This legislation still exists today. Next comes one of the major forest-based movement in India and also that happened across the globe, the Chipko movement. The conflict over the control of natural resources in our country is not new, but the discord between the people and also the evolution of state has been awarded autonomy. There has always been a tension between safeguarding the interest of these marginalized people and also spearheading the industrial and commercial developments throughout the country. The tension continued for ages, and people mostly resorted to various strategies for protecting themselves from these kind of arbitrary encroachments. The marginal people always found them at the receiving ends and struggled hard to rescue themselves from such forceful state-sponsored intrusion over the resources that they believed belonged to one of their own. Before understanding the Chipko movement, we need to understand a bit about the socio-cultural fabrics of Uttarakhand. Now, if we go into the map, we can say that this Garhwal region basically comprises of 8 hill districts of Uttarakhand, which includes Pauri, Chamoli, Tehri, Uttarkashi, Dehradun, Almora, Pithoragarh and Nainital. Now the first 5 constitutes the Garhwal region, while the remaining 3 forms the Kumaon region. Uttarakhand has always been a separated state from rest of the country in the pre-British era. Though it stood alone in a dense forest canopy, it has always been a state which has been mostly governed by the indigenous royals and has been least mediated by any external power. The kingdom was split up into several chiefdoms which was ruled by various rulers like the Katuris, the Somchand, Ajaypal Pamwar and Prithvinarayan Shah. Now the Shah was finally who was defeated by the British forces who took over the Garhwal region, and the custody of the Kumaon region was vested upon the son of the last Garhwali ruler. Soon after, the Anglo-Nepalese War also took place and British thus occupied the Kumaon region as well. Now the landscape of the state changed its way to make way for their colonial masters. The state-sponsored monarchy followed a close exit, while the state was literally handed over to these alien group of foreign rulers who, without any knowledge about their culture or ethics of these Garhwali society, began to rule these people who up till now was governed by the rules of their common ownership. A sudden intrusion by these foreign rulers armed with idiosyncratic ideas of extortion and extraction could not befit the collective economy of the forest conservation or redistribution which Garhwalis have believed for so long. The eviction from their land, the forest, created a sense of desperation among the Garhwalis, which cannot be felt without an understanding of the Garhwalis' forest economy and the culture they were undergoing. If we take a peek into the Garhwalis' culture, we can understand that these people have always learned to live peacefully in the lap of nature. Their society structure has always showed factions and has always shown that there has to be prior importance that has to be given to the economic, to the environment and also to the forest they conserve. One of the important factors in this is the religion. In India, worshipping nature and her sacred groves has always been continued. The Garhwali region has been no exception. Here in each village, they had some specific deities known as the Gram Devta or the Ishwar Devta that was much worshipped with a lot of fanfare. These trees were supposed to protect them from any kind of spooky spirits and immune them from external ravages as well. They did not seek any institutionalized practice to address their grievances. Rather, they resorted on this non-institutionalized divine means for any kind of help. This gave them an innocent persona that helped them to sort out their own problem without resorting to any kind of formal or legal procedures. Dhandak is actually one of such silent form of protest movement that waged in Garhwal region. Here, it was a way of opposing to the unfair policies implemented by the monarchs of the state. The act was meant to punish the corrupt officials who were reaping the benefits accruing upon some kind of harmful policies. The people felt that by staging such form of protest, they can actually help the monarchical rule and help them to rule with able hands. Therefore, we can say that this revolt was not triggered against the state but against the officials who were corrupt and who thought of robbing common people's assets. The movement was often said to have picked up this Gandhian strategy of satyagraha to protest against the commercialization of this much owned forests. Now coming back to the Chipko movement, the cause of the protest. The Chipko movement largely meant embracing the tree to protect them from their cutting down. The forest that supported the village for centuries was suddenly taken over by the colonial rulers who thought of deforesting the entire region. Men were obsessed with the forest because they served as a storehouse of resources that they could not live without. Besides providing them with a regular supply of fruits, berries, roots, wood, fodder, they indirectly helped in retaining the groundwater level and binding the soil, which prevents the drought and the famines of this region. Gharwalis were in praise of this forest and tried hard to conserve them with utmost care, not just physically. Their ideologies were also ingrained with such ecological ethics, brought conservation in forefront of their communal life. They were wary of the ill effects of deforestation, and so they strictly forbade any tree felling across their landscape. Two more historic events happened during that time which triggered this movement endlessly. One was the building of railways by the British government, and second was the Sepoy Mutiny. The Himalayas were largely affected, especially the Garhwali region was largely affected by these two movements. First was because the Garhwal region actually harbored very tall trees which were very sturdy and durable and were most suited for making the railway slippers. Felling of trees took a drastic step with the beginning of Sepoy Mutiny. When the mutiny started, the British forces felt that they need more railways to quell down the revolt, which means that a pressure was created for more and more trees to be blatantly cut down. Not just the Himalayas, but other extensive parts of northern Indian forests were adversely impacted by the expansion of railway, especially in the era from 1869 to 1884. The situation in Garhwal started slowly spiral down and went out of the control when government decided to install a forest department to take control of this situation. Since the British did not probably had any idea about the ethnocultural region of this area, they thought of taking advice from some German foresters to help them design this Forest Act. Obviously, the Germans did not had any knowledge about the indigenous history of this region, and therefore, ignorant of the microhistory of this region, the Germans decided to pass this act. The legals imposed restrictions on forest rights of the common man who could no longer use the forest resources or any kind of forest produce without the permission from the forest department of the state. The Tehri Raja's son, who in turn leased large tracts of trees to this British Empire, also was in support of this Forest Act. This complicity between the state and this imperial force deprived people from using the natural resources which they have grown up thinking it to be their own. It took time. However, this became more and more complicated and difficult, especially for the women folk of the region. With declining forest, gathering timber, fruits, berries became an ardent job, and since most of the women was entrusted with this primary task, deforestation means that their life hassle became more difficult. This also meant that women not only have to now complete the household tasks, but they have to now travel longer roads to take the resources for these sustenance which they could earlier readily get available in front of their home. This smooth and tranquil life was being trespassed by this alien law which started creating boiling fumes among this Gharwali region. The situation was soon going out of the control, and it turned into an act of violence in December 27, 1906, when 200 villagers attacked the official campings in Tehri. The violence refused to pull up and reappeared again into 1907 when the forest officers of Tehri, Sadanand Gairola, was roughed up in Khandogi. King Kirti Shah immediately rushed to the spot and pacified the angry mob. Now, from these small incidents of violence, this entire movement turned into a peaceful non-cooperation one, also known as the Forest Satyagraha. The Chipko movement soon changed its course to embrace into the peaceful resistance instead of taking a bloody patch. In 1930s, the Gharwalis initiated this non-cooperation movement, centering a decisive agenda to protect the forest and its richness. Satyagraha movement was championed with utmost ardor against the colonial forest rulers in the Raiwan region. The king of Tehri, who was detouring Europe at that time, asked his Diwan Chandrakant Jayal to repel this movement with force and armed repression. Several unarmed satyagrahis died while they were trying to cross the Yamuna river. The movement again gained momentum from the anti-colonial struggle at the time again when the Satyagraha movement came into prominence. The Chipko movement was an important junction of Indian independence movement which greatly enthused into the democratic demands of Gharwalis. Satyagraha, as we all know, is a form of movement which was popularized by Mahatma Gandhi, the father of the nation, as a strategy connived to play down the treacherous tricks which were played by the imperial forces ruling down the country. Now, some of the protagonists who led this movement were the pro-Gandhians such as Sri Dev Suman, Meera Behan and Sarla Ben. Sri Dev Suman was inducted into Gandhian Satyagraha during the Salt Satyagraha. He died a martyr's death championing the rights of these Gharwali people. Both Meera Ben and Sarla Ben worked under the aegis of Gandhiji, and following Gandhi's death, they took refuge in the laps of Himalayas and opened ashram there. According to great historian Vandana Shiva, equipped with Gandhian worldview of development based upon justice and ecological stability, they contributed silently to growth of women power and ecological consciousness in the hilly regions of the then Uttar Pradesh. Sundarlal Bahuguna was another prominent leader of a new generation workers who were deeply inspired by these kind of Gandhian strategies. Sundarlal Bahuguna joined the nationalist movement at a young age of 13. He decided to quit politics to work for the commoners under the influence of his wife Vimala Nautiyal, who was also a dedicated social worker and a follower of Sarla Ben. Vimala at the same time worked to spread Vinoba Bhave's message of land grant or Bhudan, as it was called, to empower the rural people. Sundarlal Bahuguna alongside penned articles in various newspapers and journals underscoring ecological damages which were already done, and also sensitizing people with the ways of reviving back to lost ecological balance in Himalayas. Now, the next movement is the Save Silent Valley movement. This movement took place around 1978 surrounding the Silent Valley region, which is a tropical evergreen forest in the Palakkad district of Kerala, India. The Kerala Shastra Sahitya Parishad was an NGO which was led by a poet activist Sugatha Kumari, who played an important role in this protest. The Kerala State Electricity Board proposed to build a hydroelectric dam across the Kuntipuza River that runs through the Silent Valley. In February 1973, the Planning Commission approved the project at a cost of 25 crores. Many feared that this would submerge around 8.3 square kilometers of untouched moist evergreen forest. Several NGOs started opposing this project strongly, and under the forces, in January 1981, Indira Gandhi declared the Silent Valley to be protected. In June 1983, the Central re-examined the issue through a commission chaired by Professor Menon. In November 1983, the Silent Valley Hydroelectric Project was called off, and in 1985, the then Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi formally inaugurated the Silent Valley National Park. Next, the Jungle Bachao Andolan. This movement started in the year 1982 in the Singhbhum district of Bihar. This movement was led by the tribals of Singhbhum. The main aim of this movement was against the government's decision to replace all the annual sal trees with the teak trees. The tribals of the Singhbhum district of Bihar started protesting when the government decided to replace the natural sal forest with these highly priced teak trees. This movement was also called by many as the greed game political populism. Later, this movement spread to Jharkhand and Orissa as well. The fifth one is the Appikko movement. The movement started in the year 1983 in Uttar Kannada and Shimoga district of Karnataka. This movement was led by the facilitator Pandurang Hegde, who helped to launch the movement in 1983 against felling and commercialization of natural forest, and which can ultimately ruin the ancient livelihood. It can be said that Appikko movement is the southern version of the Chipko movement. The Appikko movement was locally known as Appikko Chaul Valley. The local embraced the trees which were to be cut down by the contractors of the forest department. The Appikko movement used various techniques to raise awareness, such as foot marches in the interiors of the forest, slide shows, folk dances, street plays, and etc. The second area of movement of the work was to promote afforestation on these denuded lands. The movement later focused on rational use of this ecosphere by introducing alternative energy strategies. Although the movement initially was a success, the current status of the project is now stopped. Some of the major movements across the world. The World Rainforest Movement. The World Rainforest Movement is an international initiative created to strengthen the global movement in defense of forest and in order to fight deforestation and forest degradation. It was founded in 1986 by the activists all around the world. The WRM actions are oriented to support the struggles of indigenous people and peasants community in defense of their own territories. The head office of this WRM is situated in Uruguay, and the main areas of their work includes expansion of monoculture tree plantations for production of timber, cellulose, palm oil, rubber, biomass, etc. The impact of corporations that extract timber, minerals, water, fossil fuels from these forest territories, and of the infrastructure that supports this exploitation to reduce this impact to a considerable extent. Initiatives that are presented as solutions but are in fact only can exacerbate forest loss and climate change. They need to stop these kind of initiatives. Newer trends relating to corporate tactics and national and international policies that facilitate appreciation of forest communities has to be increased more and more. Local struggles and resistance strategies of movements of organizations and communities in defense of their territories and forests has to be increased more and more. And also the differentiated impacts of women that women faces when their lands are encroached and appropriated, sexual violences, harassments, persecutions and deprivations needs to be stopped. In conclusion, we can say that in wake of global warming, ozone depletion, biodiversity loss, and inequitable development, environment movement has taken the shape of a global social movement which has tremendously helped in raising awareness. As a result, Government of India has also taken several steps from time to time to address these kind of issues. Courts have also acted on PILs to address environmental problems. India has introduced CNG vehicles, and also Supreme Court has established green benches to address environmental issues. Rajasthan has launched rainwater harvesting drives. Government has launched National Environmental Policy in 2005 to address many of such issues. Also, scheduled tribe and other traditional forest dwellers has been recognized in the Forest Act of 2006 to address this conservation of forest and their respective livelihoods. Thank you.